today. I apologize, we are starting just a couple minutes late, but we have everyone here now. The Manlius Historical Society and the Manlius Library would like to thank you all for attending the first phase of a joint project between our organizations. I would like to personally thank Matt, the director here at the library, and Tibby for allowing the Manlius Historical Society and our vision to capture oral histories to be brought to life. It is through their support and encouragement we were able to make this project a reality. Today's presentation and roundtable discussion marks our efforts to begin digitally capturing oral histories of local residents to share with our community and the world around us. This is a combined collaboration between our organizations to capture the past, present, and future, or as we refer to it, living history. There are wonderful stories in our community that we feel we must preserve and honor. We will start today's presentation with Matthew Ertz, the Madison County historian, followed by Robert Good, retired Command Sergeant Major and World War II expert. We will then give you a brief intermission where you can have some cookies and coffee and water, look around, and we will conclude with our roundtable discussion consisting of Patrick, Bill, Ralph, and David, and that will take place here. I want to thank you all for helping us give a voice to the brave men and women of World War II.
Hi there.
Hello.
You can say hi better than that.
Hello.
Thank you. The reason I'm actually here is last year Madison County undertook a similar project to what the Historical Society and Library are trying to do. Every year in October is Archives Month in New York State. We're supposed to come out and celebrate our archives, and we decided rather than pull out our archives, we decided we'd make our own. So what we did is we coordinated with each library in our county, and we put together a program where we brought one veteran from World War II to each library. We interviewed the veteran and we recorded it. And what we ended up with was 8 DVDs. The DVDs, I'm going to just go through them because I don't always remember. The DVDs range from a number of veterans. This was a mechanic who happened to carry his camera around everywhere as he went in the European theater, and has a number of photographs that you'll never ever see in public of different accidents and stuff like that that never got reported. This was an event where we had a number of different veterans speak on different things. A Navy veteran in World War II that was in the European theater. A Marine that fought in Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal, who told a couple of neat stories and was actually on a submarine after the first bomb was dropped on Japan, waiting as the invasion force, which most people don't know. We actually did have an invasion force that was prepared to go in. Joe Carinci was on a ship that was owned by the Vanderbilt family that was struck off the coast of North Carolina, and told that story. About half the soldiers died. He managed to get back up and come home, and served overseas for the Navy. Havner received a Purple Heart for, in his words, getting hit by a rocket because he wasn't fast enough to move out of its way. Was quite the character in his stories. Leonard Scoop Resiger fought in the European theater along France and a couple other spots, told a number of great stories. And Bob Lasher was on the USS West Virginia in Pearl Harbor. And we'll play about a 3-minute blurb of Bob. But Bob served the entire time in the Pacific, has told me he wasn't going to talk very long. He talked for about 2 hours, told every story he could. And like I said, I'll finish with just a short video of him and one of his stories, which is quite humorous, actually. But I always started my talks with this little blurb right here, and I always ask, does anybody know what newspaper this is? Anybody ever heard of it? So most newspapers during World War II were edited for obvious reasons. The newspapers tried to keep information as limited as possible for the fear of spies. This was not a normal newspaper. The Oneida Community Silversmiths, published their own newspaper to monitor what employees did during the war. The Oneida Community also did $50+ million in military contracts during the war from 2 sites, one at their site in Oneida County in Sherrill, the other one in Canastota. They took over a business. So they actually published a newspaper the entire time that told what they were making, what their soldiers that were employed by them were doing. It's a fantastic resource if you ever want to learn about history from a non-censored version of a newspaper. And it's a great resource. So, approximately 16 million soldiers from the U.S. served during World War II. Approximately 1.3 million of those soldiers came from New York, and approximately 4,000 soldiers came from Madison County. Just to give you an idea how big this war was, that's approximately 10% of Madison's county population served overseas during the war. It's a huge number. You want to even drop it down a little bit lower, that's somewhere between 20 and 25% of our male population that served overseas during the war. So just a massive number of soldiers that served. Of those soldiers, about 400,000 soldiers died, about 31,000 of those guys were New York State soldiers, and about 170 of them were from Madison County. If you look at the official records, I'll tell you that 103 soldiers from Madison County died. We say 170 because we included anybody that had ties to Madison County, whether you went to high school in Madison County and maybe lived across the border. We've accumulated this through a number of different sources, newspapers, just general death listings, our local government archives, and that's where we came from. One of the interesting stories that comes about from World War II, we'll get to that in a second. The first resident to be killed in Madison County was Laverne Austin of Perryville. Laverne died, he was on the USS Arizona when it was attacked. He is buried in Madison County in Peterborough Cemetery. The final resident that we know of that was killed was Michael Bruno. Michael died from complications of pneumonia in September of 1945. Michael actually made it back home, but was never able to recover from pneumonia he caught while he was in France. He is buried, I believe, in Lenox Rural Cemetery, if my memory serves me right. One of the interesting things that came out from World War II was a lot of our colleges actually transitioned into some form of military training. Colgate University was one of 131 colleges that took part in the V-12 Navy College Training Program. It offered students a straight path to a naval commission, as did Syracuse University, Marist College, a number of colleges took part in different things. Morrisville College in Madison County, one of their higher ups actually took part in the implementation of the Marshall Plan. So we had a number of different things that kind of went on with Madison County, and I think I'm going to switch up right now to play you Bob's video. Bob served on the USS West Virginia. A little bit about Bob. Bob had not done an interview in a long time. Bob was not real interested in doing an interview. But I talked to him a couple of times and we convinced him to do it. He's still alive, he still lives in Chittenango. He doesn't make public appearances, but if you ever want to meet him, he goes to Flo's Diner out in Bridgeport a couple times a week. You'll know when he wants to meet someone who wears his World War II survivor hat when he's looking for a free lunch. He's quite the character. He started off talking about his time in Chittenango. He actually knew Laverne Austin, the gentleman who was killed on the Arizona. He served the entire war on a number of different shifts and a number of different positions. He tells a lot of great stories. He saw the USS Lexington shot down. If you don't know that story, they tried really hard to let it just burn on its own. It wouldn't. It had to be hit with some torpedoes. He was part of the group that watched it go down. He talks, I'm not going to play any of his Pearl Harbor due to time constraints today, but he talks about Pearl Harbor a great deal, what it was like. He was actually inside the printing press room when they were hit. They were all locked inside the boat initially because they didn't know when you're hit by a torpedo. They would close up the doors and kind of lock everybody in. The captain gave the abandoned ship, and as he came up over the top, he doesn't know what he saw, whether it was their ship blowing up or the Arizona, but a big white light and he was in the water. Very interesting to see. He also talks about the closest he feels he came to death was they watched the Japanese drop torpedoes, and they actually watched the torpedoes coming at them. As the 5 torpedoes approached, he said, if one hits us, we're going down, and there's 5. Fortunately, they had him set for carrier level, and he was on a destroyer, so they went underneath the boat. So he tells a lot of great stories. All these videos are available at Madison County Public Libraries, as well as at my office in the Madison County Historical Society, if you ever want to take a look at them. What I'm going to play for you right now is, when Pearl Harbor happened, there was a lot of confusion, and Bob tells the story better than I can, but Pearl Harbor happens, he gets out of the water, he gets up on base, he reports himself, and a few days later he's on a ship on his way out chasing the Japanese fleet into the Pacific, and I'll let him take the rest from here. And I made a promise to him I wouldn't show him when he's talking, so you're only going to see this for a second.
Interesting story because you were reported dead back stateside.
They reported you as dead to your family.
Well,
How did that come about?
well, I get around to that. But anyway, we went to sea and we went down into the South Seas. And about being
Matthew, can you turn it
deported.
up?
It's as loud, I'm not sure, is there?
Namath was in Washington at the time. He was a commander out there. After a while, he came out and took over on the dam. And a man, that's his name. He was a good man. But he was in Washington at the time. We all turned our names in at Pearl when we got over age and turned our names in. Of course, they sent them back to Washington. But I think they got them mixed up with casualty because my name was, we're sorry to inform you, we thought it was lost at war in Pearl Harbor. Sorry, that sort of thing, you know. I've got that telegram, my mother got it. And it went about a week before they discovered her error, so then Namath signed that one, that's the first one. Of course, he got into the war after that, but somebody else signed the second and come back. We hope we didn't get disinformation on it. It has been discovered your son is alive and well. He'll get in touch soon. Now, we were at sea, see, I didn't even know this happened. I'm out there at sea with the rest of us. And these tankers would bring oil out to it. We'd be 5 miles way out from everywhere. And they'd bring tankers. Now, I've always wondered how in the world they made it, because usually they were alone. And good Lord, the submarines would drop them easy, you know, because they didn't have any protectors. And I see them coming over the horizon, and they'd say that's our fuel. So they fueled up that big pipes that they, well, they also brought us our mail. Now, we've been at sea a couple months, see, nobody really wanted to wear the Navy, so that's where we were. But they brought our mail out. Here I had some back mail. I was reading my own obituary. It's just right up on the back by that, you know. I didn't know that had happened.
So if you didn't hear, and I apologize for the sound quality, but Bob reported that he was okay, got on a ship and took off, and his mother received a telegram that he was killed in action. He still has the telegram. They planned the funeral. The funeral's in all the papers. They coordinated it. We're ready to have it. And they got a second letter in the mail that said, "We screwed up. He's okay." Bob was on a boat heading overseas and did not get any mail for 90 days. The tanker ships used to bring him mail about 92 or 93 days. He gets a letter. The first letter he opens and it's his own obituary that his mother sent to him so he could know that he was still alive. Bob has a number of other great stories, as do all of our veterans. This one's a little different just because it's just so odd. But we encourage you, if you want to come to Madison County and take a look, we have Bob's video as well as many others. We have at least 3 or 4 more veterans we're hoping to get interviewed over the course of the next few months. And we hope that these will be available for anyone who wants, in terms of researchers, teachers, students, anybody who's interested. And we wish the library and the Historical Society best in their efforts, because it is quite interesting to talk to these guys and get their stories out of them. And I thank the veterans. I know there's at least 2 World War II veterans here today. I'm sure they'll tell great stories as well. So thank you, and the next gentleman up.
Thanks, Matthew. We're just waiting on Robert. He'll be here in just a moment, and he will be our second speaker.
No problem. Any questions while I'm here and he's not?
How did you decide to start the project?
Archives Day is always an interesting event to try and get people to understand what it is, and not everybody always does. So we always try and do something different. This year we decided we were going to do, for a terrible pun, the Archives Roadshow. So to do the Archives Roadshow, you actually have to generate some interest to get people to come and visit it. The way we did that was by bringing veterans. And we had over 300 people come and attend the 9 talks that we had. It was a lot of fun. Obviously, some had more than others, but the veterans were all fantastic. They all told great stories and stuff that most people had never heard before. So, Mr. Good, it's all yours. Thank you.
My apologies for not being in the room. I got a call from a lady at the Roxborough Road Middle School about doing a display for the middle school students up there on the 28th, and that kind of pulled me away. In spite of what Laura said, I would not consider myself an expert on World War II. I don't know if anybody truly is. We all continue to learn, and sometimes the vets correct us on things we have wrong, which I find nothing wrong with that. I would rather be accurate and have somebody correct me than to be wrong. My name is Robert Good. I'm the youngest of 7 children of 2 World War II veterans. My mother was in the Army Nurse Corps, and my father was in Army, initially Coast Artillery, and later anti-aircraft artillery. Both of them joined before World War II. My dad and his brother were both had graduated from college and were teachers, and they saw the war coming and they wanted to be in on it, so they went down together and joined in November of 1940. My mother had been a teacher. She'd gone to Plattsburgh Normal School and got her 2-year teaching certificate that found up in rural Lewis County. She was teaching some students that were older than she was because they only came to school when it wasn't planting or harvest season. So she had enough of that after 1 year and went down to New York City and went to Bellevue School of Nursing and became an RN. And in July of 1941, her brother, who was in the National Guard, his unit got activated. So she decided, if he's going to go, so am I. And she went down to the little recruiting booth in Times Square and said, sign me up for the Army Nurse Corps. And they sent her to Pine Camp, New York, now known as Fort Drum. My mother, her hospital unit assembled in San Francisco, the 147th General Hospital. And in the late March of 1942, they set sail and opened their orders outside the territorial limit and said, you're going to Corregidor. Well, partway across the Pacific, they decided the situation in the Philippines was not too good, so they diverted them into Hawaii. And they were set up in the former St. Louis College in Honolulu. My dad, back then you did basic with your unit. He went first to Fort Slocum, New York, which no longer exists, and then was shipped to the Pacific and sent to Hawaii and wound up with the 98th Coast Artillery anti-aircraft at Schofield Barracks. And he was there on December 7th. He was down in downtown Honolulu to see his Japanese-American girlfriend when the attack came in. And he said it was just absolute chaos in downtown Honolulu. When the Americans finally did start shooting back, American 5-inch anti-aircraft shells were landing in downtown Honolulu and the surrounding areas. And the planes were flying over, and then vehicles came through with loudspeakers telling all military personnel to report back to your base. Which in that chaos, by the time my dad was able to get back to Schofield, the first wave was done with. And they went to get ammunition for their guns, 50 caliber water-cooled anti-aircraft. And a Marine guard on the ammo dump bunker wouldn't let him in without a letter from the island commander. Well, Dad had been a boxer in college and in the Army, and that ended that. But it wound up half of their ammunition would not fire because it was 1918 issue and they'd been in the bunker all those years. The night after Pearl Harbor, the evening of Pearl Harbor, they were digging in, expecting the land invasion. My dad was on guard duty. He was corporal of the guard. In a binder back there, I have a picture of him taken on December 5th, 1941, as corporal of the guard. And they started getting radio messages on the radio in the guard shack, things just saying, "They're over there, they're landing, we need help down here." And then there'd be sounds trying to make it sound like gunfire, and guys yelling and everything. This is coming on the military radio channel. And my dad saying to the officer of the guard, "You know, we should go down there and help them." And he's saying, "No, you sit right there, you stay here." Well, the following morning, the MPs and the FBI raided Chubby's Bar outside of the gate of Schofield Barracks, run by a Japanese American, and they found the radio that had been broadcasting. After Pearl Harbor, they sent my dad back to Camp Davis, North Carolina for Coast Artillery Officer School, Officer Candidate School. And when he returned, he was shipped to a way outpost in the South Pacific known as Christmas Island, out in the middle of nowhere. And life wasn't too good for him. And my mother, meanwhile, was up in Hawaii, and one of the things she remembered in late May, very late May, like the last week of May, 1942, her officer in charge with the supply, her colonel in charge of the unit with the supply people came around, and they issued all personnel a second musette bag with 2K rations in it, a spare uniform, spare shoes, a whistle, and a sheet with signals on it. And they said, "If we give you the word, you head for the hills following this map, and here's your signal list so we can get together." And she found out a few days later that was because of the Battle of Midway. If we lost, Hawaii was open, and they had an escape plan. My dad on Christmas Island was injured in an accident, and they sent him back to Honolulu, and guess where? The 147th General Hospital, and Mom was his nurse. And, you know, many wartime things like that, and after a whirlwind 4-week romance, Dad got sent back out to train for the upcoming Mariana Islands campaign. And Mom found out a few months later that she became pregnant with my oldest sister on the honeymoon, and she was shipped back home eventually. Dad would later go on to Saipan, Miniwituck, and Kwajalein. One of the I'm sorry, I get a little choked up thinking about this stuff because I remember how my dad got when he talked about it. On Saipan, when he first got off the ship, he said the thing that struck him the most was the Marines still floating in the water on the beach. He cried about it at 90 years old. He became a battery commander as a second lieutenant, which is usually unheard of, but his battery commander, they would get snipers firing on them, and they had one particular big engagement against the Japanese that left a real pretty littered battlefield, and they were under strict orders not to go out souvenir hunting because of the snipers. And these two enlisted men went out without orders and were picking souvenirs, and both of them were killed. Well, because they were violating an order, their family would not get the survivor benefit. So the captain, the commander of the battery, took the hit and told the superiors he gave permission to go out there, and they relieved him. But he took the hit so those guys' families could get their money. One of the times, they had to take turns going out on the sniper sweeps. One of the times my dad was on, and he was backing, they were supporting the 27th Division. And in the terrain of Saipan, the coastal area, and I'm not going to slight the Marines, but the coastal area where the Marines were fighting was much better terrain than the 27th had inland. It was rougher, more dense jungle, and a lot of cliffs. And my dad was scaling this cliff with a sniper, on a sniper hunt. He had his .45 pistol, and he said, I looked up and here's a Japanese soldier looking down at him holding his rifle. And he said, he just looking at him, and the guy just turned and slipped back up in the brush, and he said, I don't know why that guy didn't shoot me. He said whether he didn't want to give his position away, or he said a lot of their weapons were so rusted from the environment that he doesn't know whether they would shoot or not. But at any rate, the Japanese soldier let him go. So after the Saipan's campaign, Dad was eventually sent home in late 1944. He was rotated home. He would later volunteer and go into the Korean War in 1952 to 53. But I was always proud of their service, and there's all the veterans we owe a tribute to. One of the things I found later on was a diary my father kept from Saipan. My dad always accused my mother of being a pack rat, which I took after her, and after my dad passed away and I started going through his things, I found he was guilty of the same thing. So I guess it's hereditary on both sides. And I hope I'm not going too long. I had a fella I used to work with named Jack Amo. His real name was Stanley William Amo, and for some reason everybody called him Jack. He used to work over at the old Accurate Die Casting. He would work days over there, days at the Jamesville Beach Park where I was working as a younger man, and he worked nights at Accurate. Well, Jack was a veteran of 1st Division. He was a farmhand in Pompey Hollow, and by 1944, farm deferments weren't meaning too much. The Army needed men, and they started taking this fellow, who was at the time 26 years old and working on a farm. Well, Jack was drafted in early March of 1944, did his basic and infantry training down in Georgia, and then he was shipped overseas. Jack told me he never set foot on English soil. He got off of one ship and onto another one in time to go in on D-Day, on the second wave on Normandy. And I took Jack to see Saving Private Ryan. I didn't know how he'd react to it. He sat there mostly in silence to it, but when it was over, he said, that was it. He told me the first German he ever saw came up from behind him and tapped him on the shoulder. He said it was about a 16-year-old, had a handkerchief tied on his bayonet on his rifle. He said he could just see he stuck me with it. But he said he looked shell-shocked. Jack would go on to fight up through France and Belgium. He told me when they were in Belgium in the late fall of 1944, they were bitter cold, and he said they wound up in this pin factory. And they were in a big room of this pin factory, and they were freezing, so they started let's collect wood, we'll build a fire. So they started gathering anything up that had burned and throwing it on this fire. Well, it got out of control and wound up burning the factory. And he said Uncle Sam had to buy that factory for him. And they were also hungry too. By this time, the American supply lines were stretched pretty far. And Belgian hares, they're big rabbits. And they were under orders, you don't go hunting these rabbits, they belong to the king or the queen of it. Well, they went out anyway, and they were shooting rabbits, and here come the MPs, and he said, darn if the MPs didn't start shooting at us. So we shot back. He said, I don't think we hit anybody, but there were a lot of rounds being exchanged. And later on, he was up near the Herdgen Forest, and he was out on the prowl one night. They were looking for food, and he got scratched by some barbed wire, and he had an inspection in the morning by the division commander, and he said he was walking down the line, he saw this scratch on Jack's face. What happened to you, soldier? Oh, I just got a scratch or some wire. He said, you get worse than this before it's over. Well, Jack did. He was on a bazooka team, and Jack was maybe 5'6" and 120 pounds, wringing wet. And if you know anything about a bazooka, it's not that heavy, but the ammo is heavy. Well, guess what? The 6'1" guy, the 100, 200 pounds, had the tube, and Jack had the ammo. Well, they got a call, there's a German tank up there, so they went moving up forward, and a German machine gun caught Jack and hit him through the thigh. And he said, darn it, there wasn't a tank up there anyway, but he got hit. Well, they didn't ship him back to England. He didn't know bone damage, so when he got back, by the time he got back, they were moving down into Czechoslovakia, and he wound up a driver for a lieutenant colonel. And very late in the war, when he was still driving for this colonel, he had taken him to dinner with some Czechs they became friends with, and he said that there was a dogfight going on up over the town. And he said the interesting thing was it was Russian Yak-9s fighting American P-51s. So it was going sour then. And he was working with prisoners because he was in the motor pool, and they had 2 German POWs that he said knew more about our vehicles than our own mechanics because they had used so many captured vehicles. And they were rigging up a cab and an ambulance heater on this Jeep for the colonel. But he said that the prisoners, they had regular German Wehrmacht, and they had the SS guys, and he said, you know what? He said, we hated the Russians we had that had been former German POWs more than anybody else. And he said it's just the way they carried themselves, carrying on a ruckus. But thought a lot of Jack, and some of the material I had back here came from Jack and his family, and I'll always remember the guy. Dad had a lot of friends that used to come and visit us that he knew from his military career. Names I remember: Jack Popel was a teacher he knew from down in Long Island. Jack was Marine at Peleliu. He never made it ashore. He got hit before he even got on the beach and lost his right leg. Dick Fishball was an American Airlines pilot that my dad knew as a observation plane, an artillery spotter on Saipan for him. And you remember one time Dick got shot down and spent 2 nights out in the middle of nowhere. And they said, Dad said he had to shake so bad when they brought him in. just cold and scared. But that's pretty much about all I have. But I do want to mention one other fellow, if I could. Charlie Shea. I don't know if anybody ever heard the name before. Charlie was a county legislator from down in Fabius area. Ran the M.G. Shea store down there. It had been his dad's. Charlie was a character. I don't know if you ever knew him. He was on the USS West Virginia, and he was at Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and Surigao Strait. Surigao Strait was part of the Battle of Leyte Gulf and was one of the last battleship-to-battleship fights ever. But the funny story that Charlie told was that West Virginia was heavily damaged at Pearl Harbor and was taken up to Bremerton, Washington for repair, and that's where Charlie joined it. Well, when a ship's in for repair, and you're part of the crew, there isn't a whole lot to do. And Charlie said he was bored stiff. And he wanted to get away from base, and he found a car he wanted. He didn't have enough money, so he said, I'll write a letter home and ask Dad for some money. He said, writes home to his dad and says, I scraped together $150 to buy this old Ford, and I need a few more dollars, And his dad writes him back and says, save more money and get the car. He thought his dad would help him out. No. But he was, Charlie was a good man. But that's about all I have for you, and I just want to thank you for listening, and it's just a pleasure to honor the men and women in the uniform and the people that supported them. And thank you.
There's a question, Robert.
Yes,
Did you have a question, sir?
What is your name again?
Rob Good.
We'll take a brief intermission, folks, so we can get the round table set up, and then we will come together again and talk to the panel. Thank you. There's cookies, coffee, water. Help yourself.
Because Germany and England and France and Poland was going on in September of '39. And we decided they started a voluntary going into the Army. And everybody, they were told that they would go in for 1 year and then they would be released without a problem. The problem was that they didn't have any weapons for them to use, in particular rifles. So this is one of the solutions that they had to this, okay? This looks like a bolt-action rifle that was very common during the First World War, Springfield it was called, and it did function. You could do that with it, and it did click when you pulled the trigger, okay? It had the facilities so that they actually could even do bayonet practice. You've probably seen this on some TV where they're stabbing the dummy. And they could do, practice with the wearing the rifle and driving. And then they could also use the sights for sighting. Now, again, by 1942-43, they finally had the rifle replaced with real ones, finally. And they changed over to what they call a semi-automatic rifle, which was the M1 Garand. And this type of Springfield bolt-action rifle is basically considered obsolete, except that this was the one that they used the most for sniping. Okay, it had the reputation of being much more accurate. So just a little bit about the armaments. This bag that I'm carrying right here, everybody in the Second World War, even civilians, knew that a lot of times, especially at the very beginning, you were required to carry a gas mask. And that was the purpose of this bag. Now, many GIs, when they got overseas, the gas mask became a pack for them to carry around when they were usually on leave, liberty, where they could put stuff, a sandwich or whatever they had their lunch, or anything else that they wanted in this type of a bag, okay? But you see a lot of pictures, again, in World War II of men carrying these type of bags, and if you ever wondered about it, it was supposed to be a gas mask in there, but thank God they never got around to using gas, because both sides realized that if one used it, the other was going to use it, and neither one knew what the results of it were, so they both decided not to. Okay, just to bring us back up to.
Ralph, did you just want to say something about what you have parked in front of the
Oh.
building too?
My hobby is the restoration of military vehicles. And I have right now out in front here a 1944 Willys. Willys was a manufacturer of cars who lasted in business until about 1952 or 53. And they were the first company that was asked to make military vehicles. They did not design the Jeep though, okay? And in fact, the Jeep wasn't called a Jeep until much after the war. Some called it a Peep, some called it a Beep, and it wasn't until, like I say, after the war was over that they finally got around to universally accepting and calling it a Jeep. The Jeep was designed in Butler, Pennsylvania. I can't remember the name offhand of the company.
Bantam Car.
Bantam, okay. They had the, thank you very much. The Army had a competition to find out who could make the best overland, cross-country type of a vehicle, and Bantam came up with it. The only problem was Bantam was a company that consisted of about 18 members, people who worked, the whole factory that was it. So they knew, they made, I think 100 each that after they won the competition, and they very quickly realized that there was no way that they could make big production. So then the Willys came along, and Willys was, again, a much larger manufacturer of automobiles, and Willys took over the building of the Jeeps. And then also Ford came up and started making the Jeeps too. Now, a little quirk about Henry Ford. Henry Ford was quite a promoter of, he knew how to sell cars or anything, okay? And Henry Ford, on every part of the Ford-made Jeep, it had a script F on it, okay? Now, as the war progressed, a lot of vehicles, you will not see them if you see people who have restored vehicles, and if they came from Ford, they won't have every part on it being F, because what would happen when the Jeep was damaged or broken, they would just send it into a depot to be rebuilt. And in the depot, they didn't have the parts, it didn't matter to them as long as the parts worked and the thing got together and they shipped it out. So, at the end of the war, when they got rid of a lot of the surplus and everything else, you wouldn't get a Jeep that had entirely F parts or Willys parts. It was, a lot of times, it was just a mix match. And again, they found a way of actually making, reducing the Jeep for shipping in a box, a crate. They made them out so they could put many more Jeeps in a freighter than they could if they were fully assembled. And they actually had small assembly plants in England and then probably also in France, putting these box Jeeps together, because the box contained everything, the 5 wheels and everything else that the Jeep needed to be, to work. Okay, so if you want to take a look at my Jeep outside when you come out, you can see it. It's set up more or less like a recon Jeep, because it has a mount for a 30 caliber machine gun on the fender, which was what the guys in the recon group would go ahead of the main troops, and if they ran into trouble or something like that, they wanted that 30 caliber machine gun right there handy so that they could let loose and get the hell out of there as fast as they could, excuse my French. And that's why that is set up the way it is. But that the vehicle out there, it's a 4-cylinder. I think it was 43 horsepower. And I'll tell you the thing, as far as I'm concerned, it runs better than my 2010 Ford.
Thank you, Ralph.
Okay.
Matthew's going to take over the panel discussion.
Just a couple of tidbits. We're going to go left to right with our veterans, ask them some questions. Hold your questions until everybody's done talking, and then jot them down and we'll ask them afterwards. And one rule I've always followed when interviewing veterans, if they're not comfortable answering the question, don't push it. Fair enough? All right. So sitting right next to me is Bill Titley. Bill was a member of the 8th Air Force Bombardiers.
Yeah, well, the 8th Air Force, period.
Period, okay.
Yeah.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I was drafted,
Where were you drafted from?
New Jersey.
New Jersey. Whereabouts in New Jersey?
I was living in Springfield, New Jersey at the time,
Okay.
and that was where I was drafted from.
And what year were you drafted?
I think 1942.
Okay. Do you remember what base you went to initially for training?
Fort Dix.
Fort Dix. What, any specialty training at Fort Dix, or did you move on?
Well, no, I was there, and then I had taken a test to see if I could be in the Air Force, and I did pass that. And so as soon as I got drafted, I put that notice through, and I was sent then to San Antonio to be in the Aviation Cadet Training Corps, to be a pilot or a navigator or a bombardier.
Which one did you become?
I became a bombardier.
Can you explain what a bombardier is?
Well, we had a marvelous instrument that at 25,000 feet above the earth, we could drop a bomb and it would hit within maybe this room. That would be a shack.
And what was the training to learn how to use that?
Well, first I tried to be a pilot, but I missed that. And then I got to be a bombardier. They trained us in just over the hills from Los Angeles, in the desert. Can't think of the name of the place. But anyway, that's where I trained to be a bombardier.
Okay. How long was the training?
About 2 months.
And where did you go from bombardier school?
Then I went to Salt Lake City, where I was joined up with a crew that was going to fly a B-17 in Europe.
Okay.
And from there, we left to Lincoln, Nebraska, and we picked up a brand new airplane and flew it to England. The crew, that was the crew.
Whereabouts in England did you land?
Near Scotland. I was there about 50 years after the first time I landed there, and I was playing golf then. But I was the same place just about 50 years after my first, and I can't remember the name, but it was near Glasgow. It was, I think it's a pretty well-named airport. Maybe somebody knows, I don't know. I can't remember it anyway.
That's okay. How long were you in Scotland?
Oh, I guess about 12 hours.
Oh. A long stay.
Next thing we knew, I was in Thorpe Abbotts, which was in East Anglia, closest to France, belonging to the 100th Bomb Group. We had about 50 B-17s and that many crews, no, more crews. And every mission that was running, we would put 36 of those planes in formation.
What was the formation?
Well, the formation was a V of 36 planes, 12, 12, 12.
So low, high, low?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Explain why they would have done that.
Well, when we dropped the bombs, we dropped them as a group. Mostly the 12, the 12, and the 12. And they would all be dropped by the same one person leading each one of the 12 formations, so that there would be a group, and that's the way we would bomb.
Each plane had how many men on it?
10.
10. How many were bombardiers?
Just one.
Just one. So how did you guys all know when to drop?
Actually, each 12 group was a group, and they all dropped at the same time. And the lead plane dropped his bombs, and everybody dropped at the same time.
So they watched the first guy, and once he dropped, everybody else dropped
That's
after.
right.
Okay. Were you ever the lead plane? Did you ever
Yes,
get to make that?
yes.
Okay. And when you were the lead plane, how did you know when to drop?
Well, I had a bomb sight,
Okay.
Norden bomb sight. I remember that. That was quite a famous item in those days. It was a pretty accurate instrument. We were flying about 28,000 feet, and the plane, I could drop, if I got everything right, marshalling the yard, and the other planes would all drop at the same time. The other 12, we would hit a factory or a bridge or a railroad marshalling yard, and they would all be together. Maybe a 500-pound bomb. I think that was, we may have had, yeah, I think we dropped 1,000-pound bombs too, but my memory is a little hazy. It's been a long time.
Do you remember how many missions you flew?
Oh yes, that's 30.
30. And how many hours was a typical mission?
When we went to Berlin from England, it was about 10 hours.
Okay.
That was the furthest we ever went. That's there and back.
Right.
Sometimes when we went to places that were shorter, like Hamburg, it would be maybe 6 or 8 hours. It took longer to get in shape and then come back and unshape, because there was a lot of airplanes. Most of the missions probably had about 1,500 planes in different formations, one after another. And it was all over England. England was like a big aircraft carrier. I don't know how much. I have a book here called The Mighty Eight, and it shows you the number of airplanes and so on. It's really a great book. It's done by a man named Roger Freeman, who's an Englishman. At the time I bought it, it was £4 and 25 pence. What it is now, I don't know. You might be able to find it in an old bookstore.
In those 30 missions, was there any that stick out more than others?
Oh, yes. All of them, really. I can't remember all of them, but they were all exciting.
Was there any?
Oh, that's, they were shooting at you.
That's what I was going to ask. Was there ever a point where you might have seen a bullet rip through the plane or something like that happen, or even see a plane nearby get hit?
Yes. On our fourth mission, the radio operator got wounded, and I had to go back and take care of him. At 28,000 feet, it's minus 50 degrees, and nobody had taught me first aid at 50 degrees below zero. So what I did finally, I knew he was headed here. I just held his, and evidently I held his blood in, so he was not bleeding to death, and he got back safely, and he's still living. When we got to Newark, that was the only time I ever had to do that, but it wasn't pleasant.
Was there ever a mission as a bombardier that you look back at and you know you'd hit it or you know you missed it?
Yes, there were two bridges over the Rhine, and we were supposed to dip this bridge. And when you drop your bombs, you get over the airplane, you're looking down, waiting for them to hit, and I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. I had bombed the wrong bridge. So anyway.
Now, did everybody follow after you and continue to bomb their own bridge?
But, one of the best things that were after the marshalling yards at Frankfurt, and my bombs were perfectly on the mark. Most of the time, though, it was cloudy, and we had radar that we would do. Actually, out of the 30 missions that I flew, I only had a chance to use maybe 5 or 6 times, because we had that radar, and we would drop that way, which was not terribly exact. I have no idea what the results were.
When did you return home?
Let's see. Just before the war ended.
Just before the war. So
Yeah.
you never went to the Pacific side at all?
No.
Okay. When you returned home, where was the first place you set foot back in the United States?
Boston.
Boston. What was the greeting like? What was it like? Was everybody partying and celebrating, or was everybody just ready to go home?
No, I think it was early in the morning, and we got off and got planes, and there was Red Cross people there with milk and cookies and donuts. So that was our homecoming.
That was your homecoming, milk and donuts.
Nice to be home too.
How did you get back to New Jersey?
Well, I trained to Fort Dix, and then I was talking to a doctor, and I happened to mention that I had a dream that I was going to go down in flames. And next thing I knew, I was on a train to Florida, Coral Gables, to rehab. I could have been out. They were discharging people then. But I spent a little time in Coral Gables and played a little golf. We had a golf course set up. Well, it was really a nice homecoming. My girlfriend came down, we got married, and we spent our honeymoon in the house that is named, that Coral Gables is named for, the owner. It's made of coral and it has gables. That was our honeymoon.
Is there anything else you want to tell us about your time overseas?
Well, I think we did a pretty good job, and I'm, proud of being a member of the 8th Air Force.
And we thank you. Bill has asked to introduce our second speaker, David Reginald Chisholm. Thank you. David was a member of the 91st Division, I'm going to try this, 91st Division, 361st Regiment, 1st Battalion of Company A, stationed in Italy. You want to give your little introduction, Bill? You said you wanted to introduce him because he was an infantryman.
Oh, yes. I used to look down at the field below me when I'm flying into Germany, and I was right in the front, in the bombardier section, and I didn't see much action down there. I really didn't. I always wondered. And then I read the book by Atkinson. About the cook. You have to hand it to them, really. I can't say enough to the infantry, the guts they had and the things they had to do. It was a pleasure being in the Air Force and bombing somebody, and we had a little difficulty, but nothing very much. And I don't think I ever, in the Army, slept without sheets. So you see, that's the kind of Army I had.
You know, he puts it down as being a soft place to be, but the Air Force had the highest number of casualties of any branch of the service, because you gotta remember, every time one of those bombers were hit, 10 men went with them, okay? So, you know,
Oh, is that actually true?
yes, it is.
That we had the
Highest casualty rate, yeah.
Ah. I didn't realize that. I thought we were pretty lucky. Of course, by the time I got there, I was there after D-Day, and the Luftwaffe was shot, and I never saw an enemy airplane. All the danger for me was the aircraft
Oh,
fire.
yeah.
And that was Happer. We did have one guy wounded with that. But
Yeah.
that's enough.
All right. You ready, David? All right. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted
When did you enlist?
in 1942.
1942. Where were you where were you living in 1942?
I come from Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin.
Okay, is that where you enlisted then?
Yeah,
Okay. Where did you enlist into?
believe it or not, I enlisted into the infantry, which was a terrible mistake.
I'll go along.
So you've enlisted, where was your first base for base work?
In Oregon.
In Oregon.
Yeah.
And then specialty training there, or did you go somewhere else?
No, we had what they called basic training there, and then we were shipped over to Italy.
Over to Italy. Whereabouts in Italy?
Or
did
no,
you-
wait a minute, we went to North Africa
North
first.
Africa, okay. Whereabouts in North Africa?
Oran.
All right. And what did you do when you first arrived? What was your initial reaction when you first arrived in North Africa? Beyond it was probably hot.
I don't know, it seemed a very undesirable place about it. I don't remember I had any strong feelings. Actually, I was 19 or 20, I guess then, and I'm surprised at how little reaction I had at times to what I saw. I mean, compared to other people. So sometimes I guess I'm not very observant.
What outfit were you with in Africa?
When I went to Camp White, Oregon, that was the initiation of what was called the 91st Division, which was an infantry outfit.
Right, and you stayed with them all
And I
along?
stayed with them all the time, yeah. Which, by the way, a lot of them didn't have that kind of experience. They were called replacements in the infantry. And that must have been a god-awful thing, because, you would come up to, let's say, in a dark night, as a replacement, not knowing anybody. It must have been terrible, and so I just make that comment.
What was the first thing you did when you were in Africa? Did you have any?
No, we had some training, presumably amphibious type training,
Okay.
but that's all.
And then did you see any action in Africa, or was it?
No,
Italy?
everything was already finished in Africa. I got to Africa in May, I guess it was, May of '44.
Okay. And then from there you go to Italy. What was Italy like?
Italy is just a delightful place. I mean, in terms of topography and everything else. But Italy, in terms of an infantryman, was terrible. Let me just mention, I don't want to talk too long, by the way. But one of the things I like to stress, and I think I've stressed this to my family, the life of an infantryman is outside all the time. At night, or during the day, depending on whether you're being shot at, you dig a slit trench. It's just a dreadful life, forgetting about the fact that anybody's shooting at you, just living that way, So I want to emphasize that an infantryman had a terrible time just living, as far as I'm concerned. And then you add to that
artillery fire, mortar fire, and machine gun fire, and so on, and that makes it even worse, of course, but, so that would be a comment I would make.
And then Richard. Whereabouts in Italy did you arrive initially?
Naples,
Naples. And what was Naples like at that point in time?
terrible, it was, the invasion of Italy had taken place, I think, in 43, probably a year before that, in a place called Salerno. And were you in on that?
No, I came out on Anzio.
Oh, okay, so, at any rate, so Naples was pretty, there was a lot of destruction there, and especially, by the way, I think one of the most vivid memories I have is, of Naples, is when we were finished with the chow, with the food that we were eating, and we had mess kits, here were these little kids wanting to, they had a can, you know, and they wanted us to dump whatever we didn't eat into their can. Things were very bad in Italy in those days.
So were the people grateful that you were there, or just kind of wanted whatever you had?
No, I don't remember too much about that. As I say, I wasn't as observant as I should have been, but I would say they were grateful, yeah, sure.
Where did you go from Naples?
Then we went up to Anzio. Anzio had been invaded, or they had landed in Anzio in January, was it?
January the 22nd.
Yeah. And by that time, they had moved off of Anzio, and in fact, Rome fell the day after we entered combat. We entered combat on June 3rd. Rome fell on June 4th.
Okay. Where did you go from Anzio?
I walked mostly from Anzio to the end of the war, which took place in Italy. The war ended, I think, on April 29th or 30th or something of 1945.
Okay. So you never were even, the war kind of ended. Were you part of the draft that could have gone over to Pacific, or no, you basically went?
We were, our outfit had moved from where we were in Italy to Naples again,
Okay.
and were on a ship headed for the Pacific when they dropped the atom bomb.
Okay. Back when you were in Italy, what was the one experience that you will never forget, positive or negative?
Well, I don't know. None of it, I mean, everything about, as Patrick knows better than I do. Patrick, I think, was wounded twice. I was never wounded. Being in the infantry is hard to describe. So I don't, and to select something that was worse than the next, I'm not sure I can do that.
Okay.
But I will mention one incident when it was in the mountainous area of Italy, and we had been told, you know, the memory now is not very good. So, but this is the way I remember it now, that in those days, sometimes the Germans were, you know, well, let's put it this way, sometimes there would be somebody in an area, let's say, where he was 50 yards away or closer. By the way, I don't think I ever saw a German close up except as a prisoner, but this kid was wounded, and he had called out, you know, probably to say, you know, he's wounded. And somebody said, well, don't go over there because that's a trap. They might not be wounded. They might let you have it, you know. But I don't know. I just had an intuition that it just wasn't that kind of a situation. So when I got there, here was this kid about my age, and his leg was gangrenous. He had been wounded, and I guess left there. You know, the Germans had retreated, and he was just left there. And so I said to him, I said, and he spoke English, by the way. This was a kid who spoke pretty good English. I said, well, you know, I guess you know that Hitler's losing the war, and he knew that. And but he followed that up by saying, my country, right or wrong. And that was the way I'm sure that a lot of Germans felt. That was the way I felt, you know. So, but at any rate, I don't know what happened to that young man. I often wish that I had somehow traced him after the war and find out what happened to him. But I assume he was taken back to a medical facility and hopefully survived. So that's it.
You're on the ship and you get word that the atom bomb is dropped. What happens on the ship? Do you turn and go home, or does it just kind of stop and say, well, we gotta wait and see?
No,
what
we
happens?
were still in the harbor in Naples.
Okay, you're still in the harbor and
And so the ship just took off later, and then when we got to the States, I was discharged and went back to my hometown,
well, where did you arrive in the States?
Fort Patrick Henry,
Okay, and then
which
how-
is in Virginia.
Yep. And then how did you make it back to Wisconsin?
I really don't remember. I suppose by a train.
Train. When you got back, do you remember if you were exhausted, if it was excited, if it was, or just you just wanted to go home?
Oh, no, I just wanted to go.
You just wanted
When
to
the
go.
war ended in Italy, I don't remember, there wasn't any excitement. It just ended,
Yeah.
period. Now, maybe that was typical of where I was, but someplace else might have been different, but that's the way it was with our outfit.
All right, thank you. And our final man, Patrick
Haggerty.
Haggerty. Okay, Patrick was also an infantryman, and once again, where did you enlist? Or were you drafted?
I was drafted.
You were drafted. When were you drafted?
I was drafted out of Syracuse, New York.
Okay.
Went to Fort Dix, and then ended up in Fort McClellan, Alabama, for my infantry training. 17 weeks of infantry, and got a week home, and then shipped out of Newport we went to North Africa, Casablanca. Why we went there, I don't know. The Army works in mysterious ways. So from Casablanca, we went to Oran. And the troops there referred to it as Oran. And all of the natives were called Arabs. So from Oran to Naples. And then from Naples, I shipped up to the Anzio beachhead. I was still 18 years old when I went up on Anzio. And, well, the operation for Anzio was on the 22nd of January of '44. So I arrived about the middle of March of '44. And things were relatively quiet. There was constant shelling. We were sort of on a plain, and then back the Germans. And the Germans had the artillery, and they could view everything on that beachhead. So I was there for approximately 2 months, up on the front lines, and then back training, and just waiting. And on the 23rd of May of '44, we broke out of Anzio. I got wounded that day. And
How did you get wounded?
I got hit by a German grenade. I had been given a job I wasn't happy with. I weighed a powerful 112, 15 pounds. And just before we broke out, our BAR man got sick. I don't know if you are familiar with the BAR. It's a Browning automatic rifle. It's like a light machine gun. So at any rate, he went to the hospital and they dumped this load of ammunition on me. So I was not happy about that at all, that's for sure. And that was one of the good things of getting wounded. I got rid of that damn thing.
Where were you wounded?
I got wounded in the chest. There was grenade fragments.
Okay.
So I got operated on the beach, like the classic MASH operation that maybe you're familiar with. Well, at any rate, got operated there, and then shipped down to Naples for further operations, I could say. I had a few more pieces to get out. In fact, I still got a couple of pieces floating around in there. I was there, maybe about a month. And one of the amazing things, shocks me even today, it gets me kind of crying. I was in the ward, and I looked up, and there's my brother. He was in the Air Force, stationed down in southern Italy. I think at the 15th Air Force might have been. At any rate, he got word from my mother, and he came up to see me. And I tell you, even today,
Sure.
wow. So, at any rate, I recuperated, and we prepared for the invasion of southern France. And that took place on the 15th of August of '44.
And where in France did you invade?
Well, we landed at Saint-Tropez, Castellar area. And, well, generally went up the Rhone Valley. You can visualize that up into that area. And I was up on the Vosges Mountains near Epinal, and I got wounded again. I got hit with artillery fragment, and I thought I was paralyzed, actually. I was on the ground, the shells came in, bingo, I got hit. I really, for a short space of time, thought I was paralyzed. And then that feeling went away, and I hollered to my buddy to help me, and my buddy says, I can't, I'm wounded myself. So the medic came over, of course, and got the regular shot of morphine, which was the procedure that they followed, and patched me up and picked me up on my feet and said, okay, down the road. And so he says, somebody will pick you up, which exactly happened. The Jeep came along and brought me down to the battalion aid station. And the doctor looked me over and said, right back to the hospital. I was classified as a severe wound.
Now, where were you hit with the?
I got hit in the back and it went into the thorax, and I was bleeding internally. So I was wounded out almost immediately, or operated on very shortly after that.
So how long did you have to walk with a piece of shrapnel in your leg?
Well, I was maybe about 15, 20 minutes when the Jeep came along and picked me up and, brought me down. And I was in what do they call it, the triage situation. Yep. And I was right there on the front line, moving up to getting operated on, So.
And did they operate on you there, or did they send you somewhere else?
Oh, they operated me right there at the advanced hospital. Okay. And then shortly after, they shipped me down to Dijon. Huge complex, hundreds of wounded guys. Had my little story. When I came in to the hospital at Dijon, one of the nurses said to me, just now, when you go home, will you buy me some silk stockings? I said, I'll buy you a wardrobe if I can afford it. And that gave me the idea that I was going to go home. Okay, I had that in the back of my mind. Well, okay, so I'm out October, November, December. You might recall the bulge came along in December, all right? And, okay, December, January, middle of March, or middle of February, the guy comes along and says, okay, Haggerty, you're going. I says, where? Back. So, looking at a very unhappy camper. Oh, and you visualize, here you are in a nice warm place. Nice bunk, 3 hot meals a day, and then you're shipped out and it was colder than any. Oh, God. And it took me a little bit of time to readjust to that. It put me right back into the rifle squad. I couldn't hack that. A buddy of mine got me a job as a wireman, stringing wire from the mortars up to the front. And then gradually I got into what they call the company headquarters communications section. And I eventually became a radio operator, carrying it with the company commander. So wherever the company commander went, I went. And usually the company commander could find a spot in a house or someplace where the other guys were out there digging in, And as David said, digging in those slit trenches and sleeping in there or trying to. Not nice, that's for sure.
So you're working as a radio man. What was that experience like?
Well, it was good. I wasn't doing the patrols or anything of that nature. I was with the company commander. Where he went, I went. It was a little bit easier.
Is that how you finished out the war?
Yeah, well, eventually I became a communications sergeant.
Okay.
That's how I ended up the war.
Okay. And were you prepared to go to the Pacific after the European?
Not really.
No.
But it's a good point. Our divisional saw is called Dogface Soldier. And it's starts out, I wouldn't give a bean to be a fancy pants Marine. I'd rather be a dog face like I am. I wouldn't trade my old ODs for all those Navy dungarees, 'cause I'm the walking pride of Uncle Sam. On all the posters that you read, they say the Army builds men. Oh, they're tearing me down to build me over again. I'm just a dog-faced soldier, and I eat a kraut for breakfast every day. So feed me ammunition, keep me in the 3rd Division. Your dog-faced soldier boys, okay. And we eat a kraut. And toward the end of the war, when we were down in Austria doing occupation, they wanted to change it to, we'll eat a jet for breakfast. That went over like a lead balloon. And the whole idea basically was, hey, we did our war, you guys take care of your war. Forget it. But the bomb came, and of course, that's.
You mentioned the occupation. What was it like being the occupation?
Actually, it wasn't bad. We spent quite a bit of time in Austria near Salzburg,
Yep.
and that was pretty good duty. The only fear that the civilians had, the Russians might come up, and we were pretty close to the Russians.
So the war ends, how do you get home?
Well, did occupation duty.
Yep.
Austria, went into Germany and did occupation duty.
Whereabouts
there.
in Germany did you do it? Where?
Up near Frankfurt.
Okay.
We were in. And then, my number came up. You accumulated so many points. So it came up, and then we went from Germany to France to England and then home.
And then, so you must have arrived Virginia and New York, kind of the northern part of the country?
Say again.
Where did you arrive in the United States when you got home?
At Newport News.
And then was it,
Then we went to Fort Dix,
Okay.
or Camp Dix.
when you arrived, was it a celebration atmosphere
No.
or? No,
Just a bunch of guys
getting off a boat.
in the wintertime, just off the boat. Yep.
And how did you make it home from Fort Dix?
Well, took the train into New York City and then came up to Syracuse. Looked around for the bus. Saw a taxi driver. He says, "I'll drive you home." So it cost me a couple of bucks, I guess $20 to get home. I lived in Oswego at that point, so that was it. And I got home the 22nd of December.
Oh, so you got home in time for Christmas.
Yes. Yep.
Was it a surprise to your family or?
No, I had called them from Fort Dix, called my mom, and my brother was home as well, the one I met. And my other brother, the oldest, also in the Air Force, ended up, well, he had been here in Syracuse for about a year at the air base, which was wonderful because he could go down and see my mom.